On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected.
Thank you to all our amazing channel members for your generous support.
On August 31, 1997, the world awoke to shocking news. Diana Spencer, Princess of Wales, one of the most beloved and recognizable figures of the 20th century, had died in a tragic car crash in Paris. She was just 36 years old. That night, Diana and her companion, Dodi Fayed, left the Ritz Hotel, pursued by relentless paparazzi. Their driver, speeding through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in an attempt to escape, lost control of the Mercedes. The car struck a pillar with devastating force. Dodi and the driver were killed instantly. Diana was pulled from the wreckage alive but critically injured. Despite frantic medical efforts, she passed away in the early hours of the morning. The circumstances of her death were violent, sudden, and painfully public. It reflected the era's growing obsession with celebrity culture and the darker side of media intrusion. Diana had long been hounded by photographers, and her final moments seemed to symbolize the relentless pressures of a life lived under constant scrutiny. The immediate consequences were unlike anything the modern monarchy had ever seen. Across Britain, millions laid flowers at Buckingham and Kensington Palace, creating seas of color and grief. Around the world, television networks broadcast rolling coverage of mourning crowds, candlelit vigils, and tributes from heads of state. For many, it felt as though they had lost a family member. The monarchy itself came under fire for appearing distant, until Queen Elizabeth II gave a rare televised address calling Diana an exceptional and gifted human being. That moment marked a turning point, forcing the royals to embrace a more open and emotionally connected role in public life. Her death amplified her legend. Diana had already earned the title People's Princess, admired not only for her beauty and style, but for her courage in breaking royal tradition. She shook hands with AIDS patients at a time of deep stigma, walked through active minefields to highlight the dangers of unexploded weapons, and used her global platform to advocate for the vulnerable. After her death, these causes gained even greater visibility, carried forward by charities and her own sons, Princes William and Harry. Today, Diana's legacy is immortalized through memorials like the Diana Memorial Fountain in Hyde Park, countless biographies, films, and cultural references. Her life and tragic death remain a lens through which we examine power, celebrity, and humanity's hunger for compassion. Her passing reminds us that mortality spares no crown, and that true power lies not in titles, but in the ability to touch hearts. In the end, Diana became more than a princess. She became a timeless symbol of empathy, vulnerability, and the complicated cost of fame. On August 31, 2023, the curtain fell on the life of Gayle Hunnicutt, the Texas-born actress who brought elegance, mystery, and a sharp intelligence to both Hollywood and British television. She passed away in London at the age of 80, reportedly from natural causes, closing a career that spanned more than 5 decades. Gayle's death was quiet compared to the high drama of many stars before her. But in its silence, it reflected the reality of countless performers whose legacies unfold slowly, long after the spotlight fades. In an industry known for fleeting fame, she had sustained a career of remarkable variety. From glamorous roles in late 1960s films like Marlowe opposite James Garner, to appearances in The Wild Bunch and Eye of the Cat, she embodied the bold, stylish, and often enigmatic women of her era. Her later career took root in Britain, where she married actor David Hemmings and became a familiar face in period dramas and stage productions. Audiences of the 1980s knew her best as Vanessa Beaumont in the television phenomenon Dallas, where she brought sophistication and intrigue to one of America's most watched shows. The immediate consequences of her passing were not scenes of global mourning like those that followed Diana or Marilyn Monroe, but rather a quieter wave of reflection from fans, colleagues, and critics. Obituaries celebrated her as an actress who had bridged continents and styles, someone who carried the glamour of classic Hollywood into the more experimental landscapes of European cinema and television. Her death amplifies her legend not through scandal or tragedy, but through recognition of endurance. Gayle represented a generation of actresses who proved that women in Hollywood could shape careers on their own terms, moving between film, stage, and television with grace. She outlived the era of the studio system that once tried to typecast her, carving instead a path defined by adaptability and longevity. In memory, Gayle Hunnicutt stands as a reminder that not all legacies are forged in sudden tragedy. Some grow steadily, like a candle that burns long and bright. Humanity immortalizes such figures not only through headlines, but through the lasting presence of their work, reruns of Dallas, archived films, and the written tributes that capture her elegance for future generations. Her passing reveals something essential about our relationship with mortality, that greatness is not measured only in drama or spectacle, but in the quiet dignity of a life well lived. Through art and memory, Gayle Hunnicutt remains with us, not as a fleeting star, but as a steady light in cinema's constellation. Rocky Marciano, the only heavyweight champion to retire undefeated, lived his life as a symbol of resilience, discipline, and relentless determination. Yet his death was sudden, violent, and tragically ironic. On August 31, 1969, just a day before his 46th birthday, Marciano boarded a small private plane in Iowa. The aircraft encountered stormy weather and crashed into a cornfield, killing Marciano and the two others aboard instantly. The man who had outlasted every opponent in the ring fell not to punches, but to fate and circumstance. In many ways, his death reflected the growing risks of modern mobility in the 20th century. Air travel, though increasingly common, carried dangers that no amount of physical strength could overcome. For Marciano, who was celebrated for his ability to absorb punishment and keep moving forward, the crash was a cruel reminder that mortality is a fight none of us can win. The immediate aftermath sent shockwaves through the sports world. Fans mourned not just a boxing champion, but a cultural icon, a blue-collar hero who had risen from humble beginnings to embody the American dream. His perfect record of 49-0 became a sacred number in boxing history, untouched for decades, and guarded almost like scripture. For fighters who came after, Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, Mike Tyson, Marciano's ghost loomed large. He became the standard against which greatness was measured. His death, though tragic, amplified his legend. Unlike champions who aged in the ring and saw their powers fade, Marciano left the sport at his peak and never returned. The crash froze him in memory as eternally strong, eternally unbeaten. It was as though fate had sealed his myth, ensuring that no decline would ever tarnish his record or his aura. What Marciano's passing reveals is the way humanity immortalizes its heroes. We build statues, we retell their stories, we study grainy fight footage as if it holds divine secrets. In Marciano's case, his name lives on in sports documentaries, tribute articles, and even in debates about the greatest of all time. His violent end paradoxically made him timeless, because in death, he could never lose. Through Marciano, we see how mortality and memory entwine. Death may silence the fighter, but legend ensures the bell never truly rings for the last time. Patricia Owens, a British actress best remembered for her haunting performance in the 1958 sci-fi classic The Fly, lived much of her career in the glow of Hollywood's golden age. Yet, like many stars who found themselves caught between fame and obscurity, her final years were marked by distance from the spotlight. On August 31, 2000, at the age of 75, Owens passed away in Lancaster, California, from natural causes. Her quiet death stood in stark contrast to the larger-than-life worlds she once inhabited on screen. Owens's passing reflected the inevitable fate of many mid-century performers, adored during their prime, but often overlooked as the industry shifted and demanded new faces. In an era where celebrity was fleeting and Hollywood's churn was relentless, her death underscored the reality that stardom does not guarantee immortality in life. It must be earned in memory. The immediate aftermath of her passing did not dominate headlines. Unlike some of her contemporaries, her death came with little spectacle. Yet for cinephiles and classic film fans, it served as a bittersweet reminder of a time when cinema leaned on raw storytelling and character-driven tension rather than sheer spectacle. Her role in The Fly, as the terrified wife confronting a grotesque experiment gone wrong, ensured she would forever have a place in horror history. With her death, that chapter of 1950s cinema felt just a little further away. Did her death amplify her legend? Not in the thunderous sense of figures like Marilyn Monroe or James Dean, whose early demises immortalized them as symbols of youth and tragedy. Owens instead became a quieter icon, her legacy preserved less through media frenzy and more through the cult following of classic science fiction. Every time The Fly is revisited, her performance is rediscovered, reminding audiences of the emotional weight she brought to a genre often dismissed at the time as pulp. What Owens' death reveals is the fragile interplay between mortality and memory in celebrity culture. Not all stars remain household names, but art itself becomes the vessel of immortality. Patricia Owens may have slipped from public life, but her image, etched forever in black and white celluloid, continues to live. We immortalize such figures not just in statues or books, but in the act of watching, rewatching, and keeping their stories alive. Through her, we are reminded that legacy is not always loud. Sometimes it lingers quietly, flickering in the light of a projector, whispering across generations who still pause to say, "I remember her." Michael Constantine, the beloved character actor whose career spanned more than 5 decades, passed away on August 31, 2021, at the age of 94. He died peacefully of natural causes at his home in Reading, Pennsylvania. Known for his warm presence and ability to embody ordinary people with extraordinary depth, Constantine's death closed the curtain on a career that had quietly but profoundly touched audiences across generations. His passing reflected a generational shift. Constantine belonged to an era of actors who thrived not on fame alone, but on craft, shaping memorable characters who felt lived in and real. In a Hollywood often dominated by glamorous stars, he found his place by embodying the everyman. That authenticity resonated especially in the early 2000s, when his portrayal of Gus Portokalos in My Big Fat Greek Wedding brought him international recognition. Gus, with his stubborn love and endless bottle of Windex, became more than just comic relief. He was a symbol of cultural pride, immigrant struggle, and familial devotion. The immediate aftermath of his death was met with heartfelt tributes. Castmates and fans celebrated not only his talent, but the warmth he brought behind the scenes. For the Greek-American community in particular, his passing was deeply felt. Gus Portokalos was more than a role. He was a cultural mirror, giving visibility to traditions and generational tensions that often went unnoticed in mainstream cinema. Constantine's death, then, was not just the loss of an actor, but the silencing of a voice that had given dignity to immigrant stories. Did his death amplify his legend? In many ways, Yes. For years, Constantine had been a steady presence in television and film, winning an Emmy for Room 222 in 1970, but it was his late-life role in My Big Fat Greek Wedding that cemented his legacy. Passing away after the global success of that franchise ensured that he would not fade into obscurity. Instead, he became permanently linked to a cultural touchstone that bridged comedy and identity. What Constantine's death reveals is humanity's deep desire to remember through story. We immortalize figures like him not through grand monuments, but by revisiting the characters they left behind. Each rewatch of My Big Fat Greek Wedding keeps Gus alive, reminding us that memory is not only about power or fame, it's about connection. Through Constantine, we see that art gives mortality its greatest opponent, permanence, and as long as his work is cherished, he will never truly be gone. Wolfgang Gulick, a name that still echoes through the climbing world, died on August 31, 1992, at the age of 32. His death was sudden and accidental, an unforeseen car crash while traveling in his native Bavaria, Germany. Gulick, known for pushing the boundaries of rock climbing, had spent his life redefining what was physically and mentally possible. The man who scaled cliffs deemed impossible succumbed not to a fall from a rock face, but to the randomness of everyday life, a stark reminder that mortality respects neither talent nor ambition. Gulick's death reflected both the daring spirit and the fragility of his era. The late 20th century was a time when extreme sports were evolving from niche pursuits into global phenomena, and climbers like Gulick symbolized the pursuit of human potential. He pioneered techniques like campus boarding, developed routes that remain benchmarks today, and climbed the world's hardest walls without modern gear. His passing cut short a career at the forefront of an emerging athletic revolution, leaving the climbing community to mourn the loss of a visionary whose innovations would shape generations. The immediate consequences of his death were deeply felt in the climbing world. Routes he had completed, once considered insurmountable, became challenges for others seeking to test the limits he had set. Memorials, articles, and climbing journals celebrated his life and achievements, and young climbers drew inspiration from his fearless approach to the vertical world. Rather than fading into obscurity, Gulick's legend was amplified by the very absence that tragedy created. His life, like his climbs, became iconic. What Gulick's death teaches us about humanity is the tension between aspiration and fragility. He challenged gravity, fear, and doubt, yet was still subject to the ordinary hazards of existence. Mortality reminds us that even the strongest and most skilled among us are not invincible. And yet, memory preserves what death cannot erase. Gulick lives on through climbing gyms, guidebooks, documentaries, and the many who attempt the routes he blazed. Art, film, and literature continue to immortalize him, turning personal passion into collective legend. Through Wolfgang Gulick, we see how humanity venerates brilliance. Even in death, the mark of a visionary endures, inspiring future generations to reach higher, push further, and confront limits, both physical and mortal. David Frost, the sharp-tongued British journalist and television host, passed away on August 31, 2013, at the age of 74. His death came quietly, from a heart attack in his London home, a natural end for a man whose life had been anything but ordinary. Frost's career had been defined by wit, persistence, and an uncanny ability to draw out truth from the most powerful figures of his era. From satirical programs in the 1960s to the landmark Nixon interviews in 1977, he navigated the intersections of media, politics, and culture with precision, leaving an indelible mark on journalism. Frost's passing reflected the era he had both chronicled and influenced. He emerged in post-war Britain, a time when television was transforming public discourse and he thrived on challenging authority with charm and intellect. His death reminded the world that even figures who seemed larger than life, masters of rhetoric and public perception, are bound by the same mortal limits as their subjects. The immediate aftermath of his death was a chorus of reflection and admiration. Politicians, journalists, and entertainers paid tribute to a man who had elevated interviews into an art form, showing that incisive questions could be as compelling as headlines. For the public, Frost's passing served as a moment to revisit his most iconic moments. His calm but piercing interrogation of Nixon during the Watergate scandal, his satirical wit on British television, and his relentless curiosity that spanned decades. Frost's death, rather than dimming his impact, amplified his legacy. He became a symbol of media integrity, the journalist who bridged entertainment and serious inquiry. Young broadcasters and students of journalism continue to study his style, drawing lessons from his ability to balance charm, pressure, and insight. In death, he was canonized not as a celebrity, but as a master of his craft. Humanity's fascination with figures like Frost lies in our desire to preserve intellect, courage, and moral clarity. Through documentaries, biographies, archived interviews, and public remembrance, we immortalize him, ensuring that his voice continues to resonate. Frost's life and death remind us that legacy is crafted not just in achievements, but in the lasting impression of how one confronts truth. Through David Frost, we see that mortality may silence the body, but memory and mastery of communication can echo far beyond a lifetime. John Ford, the legendary American filmmaker whose westerns and historical dramas defined Hollywood's golden era, passed away on August 31, 1973, at the age of 79. His death, from natural causes in Palm Desert, California, marked the end of a life devoted to cinema, a craft he transformed into an art form that captured the myths, struggles, and landscapes of America. Ford's passing closed the chapter on a director whose work had both shaped and reflected the ideals of his nation. Ford's death reflected the era he embodied. Born in 1894, he came of age alongside cinema itself, rising from silent films to Technicolor epics. His career mirrored the evolution of American storytelling, from tales of frontier justice to wartime heroism. His films, such as Stagecoach, The Grapes of Wrath, and The Searchers, explored themes of identity, morality, and the tension between individual and community. In death, Ford's legacy underscored the power of narrative to define cultural memory and national identity. The immediate response to his passing was reverent, if understated. Hollywood mourned a master craftsman, a director whose insistence on authenticity, sweeping landscapes, and human complexity set the standard for generations of filmmakers. Awards and retrospectives followed, cementing his influence on both American cinema and global film culture. Yet Ford's death also highlighted a shift in Hollywood. The old studio system he had mastered was giving way to a new era, one driven by youth, experimentation, and countercultural energy. His passing symbolized the fading of a cinematic generation that prioritized discipline, vision, and storytelling grandeur. Ford's death amplified his legend. He had already won 6 Academy Awards, more than any other director, and left behind a body of work that continues to inform contemporary filmmaking. Scholars, critics, and cinephiles study his compositions, narrative techniques, and character archetypes, ensuring that his vision endures. His passing reminded the world that artistic immortality is achieved not merely through fame, but through the enduring resonance of one's creations. Through John Ford, we see humanity's relationship with mortality and memory. While life is finite, art grants permanence. We commemorate him through restored films, biographies, and cinematic study, keeping alive the landscapes and characters he so vividly brought to the screen. Ford's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of storytelling, a reminder that while humans fade, the worlds they create can last forever.